While censorship firewalls are commonly thought of as passive filtering devices, or sometimes devices that will actively reset a single connection or a session, in 2015 we saw an evolution of this technology where China modified its so-called Great Firewall into a device that would launch denial of service attacks against other targets on the internet. In 2015, we saw the emergence of a tool dubbed the Great Cannon. On March 26th of that year, GitHub pages run by greatfire.org became victims of a distributed denial of service attack, where malicious traffic was being directed from Baidu servers towards github.com, and particularly the repositories run by GreatFire. A curious aspect of this attack was that Baidu said that its own servers were not compromised. Instead, what we actually saw in this particular attack was a manipulation of so-called bystander systems, and specifically client browsers, to send attack traffic towards a victim under the command and control of the Great Firewall. The Great Cannon is what we might think of as an on-path attack system. In this particular system, the firewall would eavesdrop traffic between China and the global internet and terminate requests for banned content with TCP reset packets, as we've previously seen. But in addition to resetting traffic for blocked connections, the firewall added an additional capability, which was to inject JavaScript into web pages being returned by Baidu to clients or browsers on the global internet. When clients on the global internet loaded that JavaScript, the browser would execute that piece of code and send traffic, in particular attack traffic, towards github.com, resulting in a large-scale distributed denial of service attack. The Great Cannon thus marks an evolution from a simple firewall or censorship tool to one that actually launches active attacks against victims. In this particular case of an attack in 2015, the targets were hosters of greatfire.org. In particular, GitHub and Cloudflare were both targeted as hosts of GreatFire's content. The injected JavaScript that I described on the previous slide caused browsers to initiate an HTTP or a web request towards GitHub and Cloudflare hosted content, resulting in massive quantities of web traffic directed at these sites. Here's a little more detail on how that JavaScript injection worked. When a client, such as a Firefox browser, issued a GET request for an object at Baidu.com, the firewall would check whether that request was for a Baidu script, and with some probability would inject additional JavaScript into that page, specifically the code that would launch the attack. What that attack code did was cause this browser to send additional web requests towards the victim sites, in this particular case, GitHub and Cloudflare. The attacking clients were located around the world, but concentrated in Hong Kong and Taiwan. That makes sense because these are regions of the world outside of China, but would nonetheless be requesting Baidu content. Most of the domains that had code injected were Baidu.com domains, and Baidu is the fourth most visited site globally. So there were likely many requests to Baidu.com during this period that had this attack code injected. In summary, denial of service is a mechanism that denies availability of a service for anybody who might be trying to use that service. The Great Cannon, first launched in 2015, was the first known example of a volumetric denial of service attack against targeted websites by a censorship entity. Nation-states continue to use distributed denial of service as a mechanism to disrupt communications and access to content. And we've even seen a reemergence of the Great Cannon itself in subsequent years, including during the Hong Kong protests.